Igor Tudor has now officially been announced by the club as the interim boss.
I'm here not to enjoy, I'm here to work.
And still Ricky Villa! What a fantastic run! He scored!
Gascoigne going to have a crack. He is, you know. Oh, it's there!
Here's Lucas Moura! Oh, they've done it! The wait for silverware is over!
Well, hello everybody and welcome to another edition of the Tottenham Way podcast. This is a special Q&A. It's driven by you and all your excellent questions and suggestions as well. I'm Marcus Buckland in the company of Tom Allnutt of the Times, George Sessions from the Press Association and Tom Barclay from The Sun. We've got a full house. I know it's all doom and gloom right now. We're going to endeavour to keep the mood light, the tone as optimistic as possible in the circumstances as we discuss relegation, the managerial succession, club ownership, some very forthright views as far as that is concerned, the players, the system, injuries, and anything else that crops up over the course of the next hour or so. I think we've got to start with the dreaded R word because it's at the forefront of everybody's mind. And we know the extent of the situation. That said, Tom, I saw some percentages that you posted online a couple of days ago, which I think gave us a little cause for hope. Perhaps you could just reiterate what those percentages had to say.
Yeah, I will, Marcus. Let me just find the email first. Go to someone else to talk about relegation whilst I get the numbers up.
I'll just jump in because Tom will get his numbers up in a minute, but I'm 99% sure about 3 weeks ago, he come to me and said, it's 1%. And then the 2 weeks ago he said, now it's up to 2.4%, and now it's gone up to 4%, I think, or around that figure. So it should give us all a little bit of comfort, but the number is going up, which is the worry.
What it is, what we have all done, it's very scientific. We have looked at the remaining 11 fixtures of West Ham, Nottingham Forest and Tottenham Hotspur, and we're going to conclude as a result of that whether Spurs are going to go down or not. Hopefully Tommy's now got his percentages. George is right. Spurs, the last time I looked, a 4.2% chance of finishing in the bottom three. So that number is creeping up. But there are teams much worse than us, aren't there?
So basically, I asked Opta for this, and they do this predicted final league position. And the current percentages for finishing 18th, we're assuming that no one's going to finish 19th or 20th. So the current predictions for finishing 18th specifically are Leeds 2.2%, Spurs 4.2%, Forest 20.7%, and then West Ham 60.7%, which does leave 10.8% for Burnley to kind of creep up one position. But I guess the main takeaway there is that West Ham fans will be feeling fairly pessimistic about that, and Spurs fans will probably be very dubious, I think, about the how low that number is. I agree that on the sort of eye test and instincts, 4% feels fairly way out, right? I don't know where we'd all put it. I'd probably say somewhere more like 25, 30%. I don't know, something like that, 20% maybe. I had a lot of people telling me in my replies that the general kind of betting odds at the moment are kind of 4 to 1. I'm not big on kind of betting kind of numbers, but I think that kind of equates to about 20%, right? So it does feel low. I went back to Opta and said, how do they calculate this? And they basically said Opta's league prediction model estimates the likelihood of teams finishing in each position in the competition. The model estimates the probability of each match outcome by using betting market odds and the Opta power rankings. The odds and rankings are based on historical and recent team performances. The model considers the strength of opponents by using these match outcome probabilities and simulates the remaining fixtures in the competition thousands of times. By analysing the outcome of all of these simulations, the model can see how often teams finished in each league position to create our final positions. So I guess I think the main takeaway, really, I'm not sure what the Opta power rankings are, if I'm honest, but I think it's a reflection of the fixtures remaining, basically. It's a reflection, really, of how difficult West Ham's fixtures in particular are. If you go through them, which maybe we will, they do have some really tough games. What I don't think it reflects is, it does reflect recent performance. So people saying it's, historic is actually not correct. But I think in this final stretch, you do tend to see the relegation fighters pick up more points. They tend to overperform in the final stretch. So, for example, a game against Fulham, for example, for West Ham, where they're the second favourites, is the kind of game where a mid-table team against a relegation fighter might lose, right? So I think it slightly is over-exaggerating the kind of emphasis of those games. But I think it is also, apart from just being a kind of, some reassurance for Spurs fans, I think it is a reflection, at least, that Spurs are still, in my opinion, in the driving seat here. It's still in their hands to throw away. But yeah, 4% does feel a little bit low, I have to say.
Well, we've got the advantage of a couple of points over Forest, 4 points, of course, over West Ham. All very good and scientific, but we're going to just bring our expertise into it here. Never mind all those calculations from Opta. We're going to look at the final 11 matches of the three teams and then decide once and for all if we're going down. I'll whiz through very quickly the games to come for West Ham. Away at Liverpool, they're going to lose that. They're going to Fulham next. They'll pick up a point there. Manchester City at home, they're going to lose that. Aston Villa away, they're going to lose that. Then Wolves at home, they'll win. Crystal Palace away, they'll win. Everton at home, they'll win. 3 wins in a row. We're all going to start panicking. Don't worry, because then they go to Brentford and lose. They have Arsenal at home, and much as maybe we'd like them to take something out of that game, they'll lose that. Their penultimate game's at Newcastle, they'll lose that. Leeds at home, final game of the season, they'll win that. By my calculations, they're going to pick up 30 more points this season. They will finish with 38. Nottingham Forest are at Brighton on Sunday. They're going to pick up a point there. Then Manchester City away, they'll lose that. Fulham at home, they'll win that. Spurs away, that's going to be a draw. Villa at home, they'll draw that. Burnley at home, they'll win that. They'll go to Sunderland and pick up a surprise point. They'll go to Chelsea and lose. They'll play Newcastle at home and draw. They'll go to Manchester United and lose. Final game of the season, Bournemouth at home, they're going to win that. Forest are going to pick up 14 more points and finish on 41, 3 more than West Ham. Spurs go to Fulham on Sunday, they lose again. Palace at home, I know we never win at home. We will win that game. We go to Liverpool, get humped. Nottingham Forest at home, as I've mentioned, we pick up a point. Sunderland away, horrible. We lose that. Brighton at home. We're not very good, but we pick up a point in that game. We go to Wolves and we pick up a point. Aston Villa away. We can't beat Villa at the moment. Lose that. Leeds at home. We win that. We go to Chelsea. Guess what? We lose. Everton at home. Final game of the season. We pick up 1 point. Spurs then 2 wins, 4 draws. That's 10 points altogether. We finish with 39 points. That is 1 more than West Ham, 2 less than Nottingham Forest. George, as far as I'm concerned, we're not going down. Would you agree?
I like your maths. Yeah, I kind of have similar. When I just, I won't pretend I've been analysing this all night. I literally looked at this about 5 minutes before. And I think Forest probably get 12 more points. I can see them beating kind of Bournemouth and Burnley. I had West Ham getting 12 more points. They'll beat Leeds, and I think Everton and Wolves, maybe a few draws. And I've also got Spurs getting 12 points, beating Palace, beating Leeds, and beating Everton. However, I have to say, I really think that Palace game is really big. I feel like Spurs have to win that Palace game. Not because if they lose that, they're going to go down. There's so many games still to go, but they just need to win a game. And if they didn't win this Palace game coming up in what is it, next Thursday, isn't it? I think everyone is going to panic, and maybe they should be panicking already. But in this situation, you do need to stay calm. And I think Spurs just need to win a game soon to give everyone that little bit of, we can win. We have won a game in the Premier League. We know how to do this, and to give the players the belief that they're clearly lacking. And so I've got us winning that Palace game. But if we didn't win that Palace game, then I would have us going down. So I really just have this feeling that Palace game is so key. We all need a lift at the minute. I think we might lose at Fulham. I can't lie. Traditionally, it's never been a good ground, and they seem to turn up against Spurs. But that Palace game just feels really big for me. I don't know what the other guys think, but there's just the kind of narrative and the feel. I think they have to win that one.
Well, okay, so at the moment, 2 of us are saying they're going to stay up. Tom B, basking in the glory of Newcastle finding a way past Qarabag in the Champions League. Are we staying up? Are we going down, according to the Barclay calculations?
You are staying up, yes. But can I just paint a quite unlikely scenario here, that Crystal Palace game, I think, but not beyond the realms of possibility. Oliver Glasner goes after the next game because it becomes untenable. And Thomas Frank comes in as the new Crystal Palace manager in time to take on Tottenham. I mean, could you imagine? I don't think that would happen, but not beyond the realms of possibility. I agree
Brennan
with
Johnson
George.
scoring the winner as well, possibly.
Yeah.
Finally doing well for Thomas Frank. That would be interesting. Yeah. I've gone through it, and I've got a similar, very similar outcome to you, Marcus, with sort of points return. To me, the crucial bit for me, because I think Forest will pick enough points because I've looked at looking at their fixtures, they seem quite favourable, is the next 2 home games for Spurs and this little run coming up for West Ham. If West Ham suddenly can pick up some surprise points against Liverpool away, Fulham away, Man City at home, Villa away, which I've got them to lose every single one of those games, if they suddenly get a win at Fulham or somehow beat Man City at home, which is not beyond the realms of possibility, then that really does put the pressure on, because I think the run-in is the next run after that. Like you, Marcus, haven't quite got them winning 3 games in a row. I think they'll draw at home to Everton, but it is very conceivable that they could pick up a lot of points there, and that's when the pressure will really be exerted. And if Spurs suddenly can't beat Palace, can't beat Forest, I've got them to beat Palace, but I've got them to draw at home to Forest. I think my results were almost exactly the same. I've got them having another 12 points, so maybe one more draw in there somewhere, or maybe one more win. I think I had them winning away at Wolves. I mean, to me, there are a few things in Spurs' favour. One of the fixtures, obviously the points gap that they've already got. The new manager bounce, which we didn't see at all, obviously, in the first game, but I imagine there'll be a factor there in the same way that Forest may have it with Vitor Pereira. And then injuries on both sides. Injuries, obviously, are a massive negative, but the fact that there should be some players coming back in the coming weeks will hopefully play into their hands. But the thing that doesn't really look at is just how hard it is to turn around form. It's how hard it is to turn around a sort of losing mentality, which they've effectively got after only 4 or is it 5 Premier League wins since November 2024. So that's the key. Going home to Palace, who themselves need a few more points, don't they, to really sort of make sure they're fine. Yeah, how easy is it to suddenly just pick it up, even if they've got, maybe the better players on paper and they really need to win it? That's where Igor Tudor will really earn his salary from this short-term tenure.
I mean, the big question here, isn't it, is that we don't actually know really what Tudor's Tottenham is going to be like. Like, I think the Arsenal game has kind of made everyone sort of freeze their analysis and feel like that Tudor's team is going to be the same as Frank's team. And maybe that's a completely fair judgment. Maybe in the next couple of games, that is going to be proven to be true. I guess if we're being optimistic, then we say, okay, the Arsenal game was a bit of a write-off because it's very difficult to impose yourself on a game like that. And you hope that the bounce, in inverted commas, is more evident against, the likes of Fulham and Palace and Forest coming up. And if Tottenham suddenly turn into a slightly more confident team, who are actually able to beat these slightly more modest sides, then suddenly, these kind of predictions that we have now look a lot rosier, right? I think all of our predictions are probably slightly pessimistic because we're assuming they're going to be kind of continuing from where they were, against Arsenal and at the, the end days of Frank. So I think that's still a big unknown. Of these 3 teams, Tottenham are very much the team we don't really know how they're going to perform in the final straight, right? We kind of know what we're probably going to get from the other 2. Tottenham, it could go up, it could go down. A couple of quirks I think that are worth mentioning are that in the next 4 games, Spurs never play first. They are always either after the other 2 or at the same time, which I always think is a disadvantage. If West Ham, as Tom very rightly says, I agree. I think everyone's sort of assuming they're not going to go away to Liverpool, for example, and win. Liverpool are a funny team. Like if they go there and beat Liverpool before Spurs have got to go to Fulham, then that does change the dynamic. And then we don't know from there. For the next 4 games are all scheduled already by the Premier League. After the international break, we don't know yet. So Spurs are going to have to kind of handle that sort of pressure. Equally, I always think it's the same with the title race, right? With the relegation kind of fight. It's about winning your rounds. It's about winning those rounds where you feel like you should have either extended your advantage or maybe consolidated. And I think Spurs have a couple of rounds, basically in the next four game weeks, where they should win the round. For example, when they play Palace at home, Forest are away at City, and West Ham are away at Fulham. Which is why what George said is absolutely bang on. Like if they can get that win against Palace, we assume, that probably Forest and West Ham aren't going to win their games, then suddenly that feels like a really big win in the round. Equally, clearly, the week where Spurs play Forest, West Ham are playing at City at home, so that's another round. Like if they win that round, then they'll feel like suddenly they'll have some daylight, and I think those are the really important things in the next couple of weeks. One more thing that's worth mentioning as well, by the way, is that the Forest game is a European week. So Spurs play Forest on the Sunday. In the middle of the week, Forest, they beat Fenerbahce in the first leg of the playoff round 3-0. So we assume they're going to go through to the round of 16. Forest are going to play away because they're not going to be seeded. So they'll be playing away on the Thursday night in the round of 16 in the Europa League. Tottenham, because they're seeded, maybe this is the final gift that Thomas Frank gave the team, they will be playing at home that week on either the Tuesday or the Wednesday. So Spurs were playing at home on Tuesday or Wednesday. Then Forest will be playing away on the Thursday before the game on the Sunday, which to me feels like a mini advantage, but still an advantage.
Yeah.
Very interesting points.
That was what I was going to add, the European fixtures. That does help. That is one thing in West Ham's favour, isn't it, that they don't have that scenario. And I think one of the teams, is it Forest or is it West Ham, is still in the FA Cup as well. So
West Ham, yeah.
So I hope that comes into. I mean, just to go back to it, my specific predictions. I mean, West Ham, I've got them finishing on 37 points. So I've got them losing the next 4, winning at home to Wolves, Palace away, drawing against Everton, draw at Brentford, losing at home to Arsenal, draw at Newcastle, albeit they did win there last season when it was all going pear-shaped. I think even Lopetegui got a win there. So Newcastle sometimes have a bit of a struggle there. Newcastle's quite a funny team to predict. And then winning at Leeds the final days, that leaves them on 37. And then I've got Forest and Spurs on 41. And I do agree with Tom, looking at my Spurs predictions, because the fixtures on paper are pretty favourable. I think I've been probably overly pessimistic. Probably because this is, just sort of almost like to sort of protect ourselves, really, because they're the ones that we obviously want to stay up. But I don't know. The only thing
they've won 2 in 18, haven't they? That's the thing. People will be pointing out that there's no reason to assume they will beat these teams because they haven't for a long time, and that's also true.
Well, listen, the bottom line is at the moment, we think Spurs are going to be okay. Not everybody who's got in touch with us is of a similar opinion. And thanks for all your questions and all your suggestions. We're going to rattle through a fair few of them. Jonathan Wood actually got in touch with us. He wrote this at half-time during the Newcastle game, which seems an eternity ago, but not much has changed. In fact, it's got worse since then. Jonathan says, well, I called out Frank in September and I thought we'd be involved in a relegation battle in December. If I can see Xavi drifting inside is leaving the team lopsided and Newcastle doubling up on Tell is killing any attack, why can't Thomas Frank? Well, of course, Thomas went straight after that. And he went on to say the January business is looking negligent. Tough window, the right players not available. Are they saying they don't know who their targets are? George knocked the nail on the head when he said if the owners are serious, you overpay by 5, 10 or 15 million to secure your player. He goes on to say, we think we're a big club. We should have acted like it. Now it's too late. At least we're bigger than Hull, who will be playing in the Championship next season. So he's not really hopeful. Antonio Senesi 7658 says the silver lining is we'd already be down if Ange was still here in this corners and set pieces heavy season. Interesting point from Stop Genocide End Apartheid, who says maybe it'll be good for Spurs to go down, might trigger a proper reset with the right people in control. And George, I know that's an issue you've been looking into, and you could not disagree more vehemently on that front.
Yeah, I respectfully disagree with that. The only, I guess, if you look through Spurs' history, actually, when they went down in 77, it was a reset, and players like Glenn Hoddle got a chance. And a year later, when Spurs got promoted, albeit it was a bit nervy towards the end, I think they finished third with a win or a draw at Southampton on the final day. After that, they signed Ozzy Ardiles, Ricky Villiers, and it was the real, it was actually the foundations to going into the 80s and having a great time in the 80s. But football is very, very different now. And you only have to look at the finances, first of all. And Kieran Maguire, who's brilliant football finance expert, I'm sure plenty of people know his name. He did a story this week in the BBC, and I'll read out some of the numbers. So he was saying Spurs' revenue for this season should be around 609 million. that's including TV money, obviously, from the Premier League and other various, income streams that you get from being in the Premier League. And the next year in the Championship, it'd be around 348 million. So that's a 250 million black hole that's suddenly taken out. On top of that, look, wages has been a big, stick to hit Spurs with for a long, long time. But their wage bill is roughly around 254 million. The average in the Championship is 38 million. So, I can understand why people might think, oh, Spurs will go down. We can get rid of Vinay, get rid of the owners. We can have a big reset. The youngsters will get a go. And that is a very glass full way of looking at it. There's no guarantee that the owners, Enoch, the Lewis family, would sell. Who's going to buy Tottenham in the Championship? Certainly not for the sort of 3-4 billion figure that was being bandied around before. So for me, relegation would be sort of Armageddon. It really would be. Look at all these players, the wages they're on. It would be disastrous. Don't kid yourself, anyone, just yet. If Spurs get relegated, I'll have to have a different mindset because I'm quite positive generally, and I'll try and find some green shoots. But let's not be wishing relegation, guys. Spurs need to be in the Premier League, even if they finish 17th this season, because going down is going to cause all sorts of mayhem and carnage. And it's also the worst time for it to come in a World Cup season. And anyone wanting Pochettino, I'd think on.
Well, on the subject of the succession, and I think most of these emails have been written on the assumption that Spurs don't go down. I'll just whiz through a few of them. Go Batcher at iCloud.com, who actually recommended Rafa Benitez to come in and succeed Thomas Frank, says Vinay and Lange are scared of Mauricio Pochettino because they'll be irrelevant / redundant, given his direct relationship with the Lewis family and the fans. No wonder Vinay now wants to pivot from the ice-cool Dane Thomas Frank to the firebrand Italian Roberto De Zerbi. I'm not sure if that is the case. Ian Bishop's been in touch. There seems to be an inevitability about Pochettino coming back. Personally, I'm not one for going back, and he's been largely unsuccessful since taking us to the Champions League final. The other problem is that he won't be available till halfway through the summer, which would give little time to prepare for next season. Thanks to Ian, who is in Northern Ireland. Roy Salfali has written as well. Says, we're always fair and honest when analysing the club. We certainly hope so. Poch is the only one that makes sense. He would bring the club and the fans back together. He also knows the Tottenham Way. Hopefully you mean the podcast, and he listens to us on a regular basis, so he knows exactly what the fans want. Andrew Cowie says that given the club's tendency to appoint the opposite of the previous manager, where on earth do we go from here? I'm not convinced that going back to Pochettino is the right answer. Gareth Haggerty on YouTube says the owners have one chance to get the fans united and onside. That is Pochettino. He loves the club. I just want to love my club again and watch us attack teams and get enjoyment. He's also a coach who can utilise the young talent we have. He improves players. Alan Price has a different suggestion. He reckons we should go for Seb Hernis from Stuttgart and bring in Ralf Rangnick as director of football. Well, you get an interesting time at Manchester United, of course. Other suggestions. Jim says if Manchester United pass on Michael Carrick, should he be in the frame? And there are those who are still yearning for the Ange Postecoglou days. Michael Footis, for example, says, did Ange in fact overachieve by winning a trophy, finishing 5th and reaching the semi-finals of the Carabao Cup? I think there'll always be those who want to see Pochettino come back. Tom A., what are your thoughts? I guess, obviously, we have to bear in mind that if Spurs go down, this conversation will become largely redundant, although we have said in the past, maybe Pochettino is the one big name who would be prepared to drop into the Championship. Have you had any more thoughts off the back of the Tudor appointment in terms of what the long-term plan is going to be?
I did ask someone that question very close to Pochettino a while ago, sort of half jokingly, would Poch manage Spurs in the Championship? And they didn't rule it out. They didn't say definitely not, but they didn't say definitely either. I think he is the one manager who maybe would kind of enjoy that sort of fairy tale. It reminds me of Juventus when they went down and Buffon went there. It's that kind of thing where there are certain sorts of club stalwarts, legends who maybe would sort of embrace that that challenge. But I don't know. I mean, I think if Poch had other good offers, which he will have in Europe, then maybe he thinks that's just, a better thing for his career. I mean, he's made some slightly misjudged decisions, I think, in the clubs he's taken over. So I'm sure he'll choose his next one very carefully. I mean, there are some interesting suggestions there. I mean, Carrick is an interesting one, isn't it? I mean, I think increasingly, I suspect the momentum behind him for the Man United job is going to really accelerate with the way they're playing. I mean, if they finish in the top 3 or 4, I think it's going to be hard for the club not to go for him. But if he was available, I think in a way, and I liked that point that one of the questions made about kind of lurching from one type of manager to the next, and I think Spurs, if they can, they need to sort of pick whatever it is, a sort of continuity, candidate who at least kind of continues something about what they've had before, and probably the most distinguishing feature of this squad at the moment is the kind of Ange feature. That's the players they signed, the way they played. Clearly, as Lange said the other day, they want sort of front foot football again. Of course they do, post Frank. But I think someone like Carrick, it feels like another sort of lurch towards, a young manager with little experience. The one thing I think as well that Poch has going for him, and put aside all the emotion and whether it's the right thing going back, et cetera, actually black and white logically, I think he makes some sense because he is the one manager of the kind of list that were pointed out there that will bring his own team in. He'll have his own coaches. Poch is quite unusual at the moment in the sense that he wants to be the manager of a club. He doesn't want to be a sort of head coach with everyone else doing lots of different things. And a lot of young managers now say, I just want to be the guy on the training pitch. Everyone else, you appoint the analysts, you appoint the scouts, and I just want to be the man on doing the coaching. Poch is the opposite. Part of the problem he found at Chelsea was there were too many cooks. Everyone was trying to kind of do his job for him. And in a way, you look at Tottenham now in the kind of post-Levy era, where they're lacking, experience, football brains off the pitch. Someone like Pochettino, who wants that more kind of overarching role, actually kind of, I think, suits the job at the moment. He can almost kind of go in and tell the club what they need to do, Maybe it even sort of says, I want this sporting director, with me. I want this, we know he brings all his favourite coaches with him. And maybe that kind of clarity is actually kind of what the club needs. I mean, I take Sebastian Hoeneß, for example, is definitely one of the kind of hot up and coming, European coaches. Definitely someone like maybe Palace might go for and would maybe do a really good job. And even Carrick is sort of in that category. I just don't know if Spurs are kind of in that position right now to kind of take that kind of risk. I think they need something that's a bit more of a sure bet, and I tend to think if Spurs were in a better position, maybe they would take a bit more of a risk and they would go for someone like De Zerbi or Iraola, maybe that would be the smart thing to do. I think the position they're in now with the fans and the unity that they need, I think Poch does tick a lot of boxes.
Tom B, I've got a question for you, which comes from His Magic. It's a bit harsh because the guy's only been in charge for one match and it was against Arsenal. But His Magic, says, how many games does Tudor get? If we lose the first 4 or 5 or 6, will the club panic again and be looking for somebody else before the end of this season?
Well, they got rid of Stellini, didn't they? After that diabolical game up at Newcastle, which, on reflection, really did feel like one of the all-time gambles of playing a back four with Porro at the time when we didn't think he could play as a full-back and Perisic as a left-back as well. And they obviously got taken apart and then obviously Mason came in after that. Bit different, I suppose, in the sense that Stellini he might have managed a few games for Spurs during Conte's illness, and he might have had one post before them. But Tudor's obviously someone who's, even though he's on an interim basis, has got absolute wealth of experience at top clubs. So I'd be surprised if suddenly there was, they lost 5 games in a row, everyone was hating it. It was clear the players were not having him, and relegation was becoming ever more a threat, then surely, nothing would be off the table. But Tudor's record generally would suggest that isn't going to happen. Obviously, it hasn't happened in the Premier League, and this is the first time in his last 5 jobs he hasn't won his first game. Not only has he not won, he's been battered 4-1, but it is Arsenal. We talked about that in the reaction pod. So I'd be surprised, but in that doomsday scenario, then I wouldn't be surprised, I suppose, if it goes that badly.
Well, he's the ferryman. I was going to say he's the ferryman. I hope the boat doesn't go down under his guidance. Tom, Tommy.
Well, I was going to say if you bring in a bounce man, then you need the bounce, don't you? You can't sort of bring in a tennis ball and then see it thud to the ground like a squash ball. Like that. That's the problem, isn't it? Like in a way, they've got 4 games here, I think, before the international break. Fulham, Palace, Liverpool, Forest. Then they got the international break. I mean, how many points do you think he needs for it not to be a question? I think if they lose all 4, for example, and they go into the international break, then I think they really do think about it, because they think, well, why do we bring this guy in who's meant to kind of get the sort of the results immediately? We know that was part of the reason they brought him in. They got an international break. They still got 7 games left. I could see them maybe go to something different, But I think if they get, let's even say 3 points, let's say they win one of those games against Palace or Forest, I think they stick, right?
Well, I've seen Big Sam's name being mentioned a couple of times. Go, Tom B.
Well, I just wanted to mention of the ferryman. I heard you say that on the pod. I must have been not on, and I get that in Italy that's his nickname. But when first thing I thought of the ferryman was Charon, the old in Greek mythology. He's the ferryman who takes you to hell. So I certainly hope that is not the case for Tudor.
We're in hell at the moment. Actually, one thing I want to ask you, George, because you were very strong about this. There was all those little themes montages after the Arsenal game of Tudor apparently, screaming at Van de Ven in particular to build a higher line. I did see Van de Ven and Dragusin rowing badly after one of the goals we conceded on Sunday. But you were pretty quick to say you didn't feel there was any particular disrespect being shown to Tudor. Then what was your reading of what he was trying to say to the players and how Van de Ven was reacting to that?
Oh, don't start me, Marcus. Don't start me on this. Look, let's name Chris Cowlan does very obvious videos, vertical videos, I think you call them, so you can't see the whole picture. He put up a video on social media saying, I can't remember exactly what the caption was, but it was something along the lines of Van de Ven, maybe ignoring Tudor's instructions. Which, if you look at that clip and the only 2 people you can see are Tudor and Van de Ven, and you just watch it quickly, then you would have, with this sort of subconscious caption with it, you would think that Van de Ven is ignoring Tudor. But if you actually look at where Tudor is looking, he's not looking at Van de Ven. He's actually looking at Dragusin, I think, or maybe Palhinha, and saying to those 2, push up the pitch. About 10 seconds down the line, you can actually see his head sort of move more in the direction of Van de Ven, says something to Van de Ven, and Van de Ven jogs over. And this is what I was talking about on the last pod about right now, everyone just needs to be together. We cannot be pointing fingers at Romero's rubbish, Tudor's rubbish. Everyone just needs to be together, because this clip goes on social media and so many fans have looked at that and said, Van de Ven doesn't care. He's trying to get another manager sacked. Get rid of him in the summer. He's useless. And it's completely false, in my opinion. And I've heard TalkSport do a big piece on this and how Van de Ven's disrespected the manager. And it's utter garbage, honestly. It's utter garbage. I watched him walk through the mix zone on Sunday, and he was absolutely devastated. These players are not going to deliberately ignore Igor Tudor. They're probably not quite used to being asked to press high again, because under Frank they were sitting so deep. But in that clip, Van de Ven is not ignoring the instructions, and that is why I took sort of umbrage with it and went on a bit of a social media rant about it, because honestly, it would not surprise me if Van de Ven gets booed in the next 2 or 3 home games, because people subconsciously will have that image in their head that he was disrespecting Tudor, he wasn't listening, and he wasn't. Tudor was not talking to him, in my opinion. And I'm not saying I'm always right, but if you really look at that closely, he is not looking at Van de Ven when he's doing those early gestures. He's looking at either Palhinha or Dragusin. And I think, without being too harsh on Dragusin, it's probably Dragusin, because he's just come back from an ACL. His fitness is not there, and he's not able to press high up the pitch. And he's also not very natural for him to press high up the pitch. But this is what I'm talking about. This situation, we cannot be drawing on, slamming individuals, blaming everyone. We've all got to pull together if we want Spurs to get out of this. I really do believe that. I didn't like seeing that. But it's sort of, it's out there and media outlets have gone with it, and we're now discussing it, and hopefully people listen to this and realise Van der Ven wasn't ignoring Igor Tudor, but I know a lot of people will see it and think he did.
Interesting stat from the Madders Day on X, who says that Spurs apparently have won only 2 Premier League games in which Radu Dragusin has started. That was against Luton and Sheffield United. He started 24 Premier League games. I mean, I have a bit of sympathy for him because he's been out for a very long time with an injury, but he certainly struggled in the second half. We'll come on to the system in a little while, the favoured system. Of course, we know that Tudor likes to play with 3 at the back. On the subject of the ownership, though, I think this is where everybody sort of unites. Martin Machin wants to know if there is a way of knowing which players are Paratici signings and which ones are Lange signings. He says the recruitment has been an absolute disaster over the past few years. Lange, by the way, arrived in November of 2023. Since then, we've played 93 games, won 30, drawn 17, lost 46. He has had 5 full transfer windows to work in. Others who have bemoaned this particular situation include Hotspur Sam and Adrian Johnson, who says Lange has got to go now. We should actually bring in Dougie Friedman and Xavi Hernandez. And on the more general subject of the ownership, Jay Clack has said that our owners are like a lot of relatively new owners. He mentions the Venkis at Blackburn, Vincent Tam and the Alarm family, says they overpromise and they under-deliver. I mean, Tom A., on the face of things, Lange's record is indefensible. I mean, what do we say about what's going on behind the scenes and the recruitment in particular over the past few years?
Yeah, I mean, just to go on the Javi thing, I'd start off because I see that name come up a lot, and I always it seems really curious to me because Javi, when he was at Barcelona, sort of got pushed out of Barca because the football was very dull. I mean, they won the league, but they won the league with about 11 1-0 wins that year. And the whole idea was that they were a very defensive team, very compact, solid, organised, but really just didn't play in the kind of Barcelona way at all. And I don't know if it's just the name or whether people just sort of want some stardust, but actually like Xavi's kind of coaching career, and it's a small sample, to be sure, but I've never seen that kind of link with Spurs at all. In terms of Lange, yes, I mean, I think he is fast becoming, isn't he, the kind of the new dartboard for this team now. With Levy gone, we were all kind of wondering where would people turn, and I think initially it was clearly Frank, and now I think Frank's gone and it's Lange, and that's not to say that it's misguided. I tend to think that Lange does need to take a lot of responsibility for this crisis at the moment. You look at the signings that Spurs have made in recent times, it's very difficult to sort of pinpoint real game-changing signings. The squad is clearly not good enough in terms of quality and quantity. And the biggest lesson there is just the lessons haven't been learned. I mean, the last 2 or 3 years, the Tottenham injury crisis has hit them so hard in every season. And if you actually think, what is the real key reason behind Tottenham's nosedive in the last 2 or 3 years, it's the injuries, isn't it? It's the injuries. I remember writing sort of Ange's obituary, and, essentially it was hard to get away from the fact that his whole tenure at Spurs was completely derailed by injuries. And one big part of that problem is clearly the medical department, but which, Lange does have a say in. But the other big part of that is the squad depth. It's running people into the ground as soon as you get some kind of thinness in the squad, the same player having to be played over and over again, and then you get that snowball effect. And Tottenham and Lange just have not learned that. In the last couple of years, they have not seen the direction of travel that so many other Premier League teams have cottoned on to, which is the key now for European teams is depth. It's depth in every single position. And I still feel that Lange, he seems to me, and maybe this is unfair, someone said to me when I did a piece about the Tottenham hierarchy, they said that the club right now is full of number twos. It's full of people who should be working underneath other people, and yet they've been put into positions of authority. And I just think that Lange is a kind of clear example of that, of someone who, to me, appears more like a chief scout, someone who sort of is very talented in certain areas of his job where he wants to kind of, be indoors at Hotspur Way, analysing young players across the world. He wants to be sort of, going over to the analytics department and talking to them about the recent performances. He wants to be looking into the training ground. He does not want to be hanging out in hotel lobbies. He doesn't want to be sort of on the phone to agents. But unfortunately, at a big club like Spurs, that is a big part of the remit. And you think, well, is he actually a sporting director for a real top team, a top European team, the 9th richest club in the world? I just don't see it, unfortunately. And that's not to say he doesn't have strengths, but I think like a lot of people in the Tottenham hierarchy at the moment, I think they are slightly exposed. I think they need more experience in there, where someone like Lange can work underneath someone else or work in the area of a department where he has strengths. But they're probably just being asked to do too much, and that's where the weaknesses are being revealed, I think.
That's interesting. I wonder if we end up speaking to the same people, because I've definitely heard the same thing about the idea of a lot of number twos sort of in leading roles now at Spurs. But I suppose, to be fair, the plan with Paratici was that he was going to be the guy who, as you say, was in hotel lobbies, was on the phone to agents all the time. Johan Lange has always been known as more of the data man, and that was the plan. But they had to do a quick about turn when Paratici decided to go to Fiorentina. It's what makes me presume really, that should Lange be at the club long term, they will presumably bring in another co-sporting director of football in a similar mould to Paratici. But just one thing I learned this week regarding recruitment, which slightly surprised me, I did a story on it today, is Ademola Lookman was offered to Tottenham on multiple occasions in the summer and in January, and they just decided they didn't want to go for him. I don't know the reason why not. I can presume my presumption rather would be his age. He turns 29 in October, and it doesn't help, does it? The fact that he's hit the ground absolutely, flying at Atletico Madrid, 4 goals in his first six games. Big chance the Spurs could play Atletico. Obviously, we're still waiting at this time of recording. Galatasaray looked like it'd be surprising if they threw it away against Juventus. And obviously on Friday, we've got the draw. It's either going to be Atletico or probably Galatasaray, unless somehow Juventus come back. And then so maybe he might end up playing him. But I don't know, like maybe he doesn't fit the particular model. We know they went for Semenyo, even though it didn't happen. They were ready to spend that money, or so they say. But Lookman would have been an interesting one. I mean, we talked about this on the last podcast without you, Marcus. Tom was saying he sort of agreed initially with the idea of sticking with a plan, but what the club seemed to have underestimated is the sort of emergency situation, as Igor Tudor put it, regarding the transfer window. And you do think that Ademola Lookman, I know, George, you've mentioned his name a few times, may well have been that kind of emergency signing who didn't really fit the plan long term. And yes, his age is not exactly what they're after. And maybe his wages would have, maybe it's finances, I don't know. And he signed for Atletico for what, 30
Sorry,
million?
Tom, but this age thing, I'm just going to jump in. This age thing does my head in. He's 29, right? So all being well, he's got 28. He's got 3 or 4 good years at the top. Okay, maybe he hasn't got a sell-on fee at the end of it. I don't care. If he keeps you in the Premier League, if he's an oven-ready player, as it were, a man who scored a hat-trick in a European final, bring him in. This has been part of the problem. We want these youth players. We'll come on to Sousa in a moment. You buy these youngsters and you never play them.
Yeah,
Sorry, George. I'll
George,
mute
can I just
myself
say,
for a minute.
just briefly on that, I sort of agree with you, Marcus, on this resale value. As a Newcastle fan, Mike Ashley was all about resale value constantly. And one thing that I always get a bit confused by with the idea of resale value is, yes, maybe the individual player might, by the time Lookman, say he signed on a 4-year contract, when he's finished, he's 32, 33, they never get their money back. But there's always discounts, like the way that they can elevate other players within the squads.
Exactly.
If Spurs go down, suddenly there's a fire sale of a bunch of players. As George pointed out, they're not going to be able to have, Romero and Simmons and Gallagher on 200 grand a week in the Championship. So, I never quite understand that kind of financial way of looking at it. Look, I don't know, like I say, the reason why they didn't go for him. I just know that he was offered to them on multiple occasions. So it might be finances, but it might not be. It might be age, it might not be. It could be a whole bunch of reasons. But personally, looking at him now, and I know it's easy to say when he's just scored against Barcelona and he's ripping up in Spain, but he feels like someone they could have tweaked their whole approach in this emergency situation.
Can I bring another player into the conversation? And George, I want to get your...
Jump in
go on.
a sec, just with that. Yeah, I'd heard similar, Tom, and that's sort of why I was pulling my hair out a little bit towards the end of January, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe he's gone to Atletico on a loan with an option to buy. So you don't have to sign him.
I thought it was a
I believe that's what it was. Yeah. So Spurs that was what kind of, I think that's kind of why it took so long, because clearly Atlanta would have wanted the obligation, but I think it was an option in the end. And this was kind of my point. Bring him in, because on paper, let's have a look at it. Can he go straight into the first team? Yes. Is he better than Wilson Odobert? Yes. Has he got Premier League experience? Yes. It's all the things that you want in January. And you don't have to commit to spending 40, 50 million in the summer to sign him if you only have the option. And, if there's an option in there and it says he starts 7 games and then you have to buy him, do what Villa have just done with Harvey Elliott. Play him for 6 games, let him score 12 goals, and then put him on the bench for the last 6.
George, I do think he went permanently for about 30 million. So I don't think it is an option or an obligation or even a loan. I'm pretty sure, looking at I wrote this yesterday, and suddenly you had me worrying about it, but looking through every article, it's a permanent deal. So, maybe if there was that offer, maybe that deal wasn't on offer. And that, you would have thought, to be fair to Thomas Frank, he was asked during that press conference, probably about a month ago now, it was about a month ago, where I think it was Matt Law was asking about the idea of loans, a Marcus Rashford type loan. And Frank he said, we'd be all over that if that was available, but there weren't any of those available. And, Lookman, if he were available on loan, would definitely fit that mold, but it doesn't look like that was the case, to be fair.
Well, frankly,
that's what I'd heard at the end of the window, those last few days, that he was available on an option, on a loan with an option. But clearly, Atletico got it done permanently in the end. So maybe that's why they got it.
Oh, you know what?
Then who knows?
30 million quid buy him. I mean, you gave us those figures earlier about the Armageddon scenario if Tottenham get relegated. It was an obvious signing. There have been so many of them. We've kind of covered the injuries. I want to thank Sean Rutledge, who was one of many who says, why so many? Wanted to mention maybe it's something to do with the ground or the training facilities, which we know are fantastic. Adam James Harris 80 said, have any of you asked Lange why we're having an injury crisis for the 3rd season running? Well, you have, and we sort of touched upon that, in particular Tom A saying it's the overuse of players. I want to ask you all about Christian Romero.
Sorry, Marcus. I think it's worth answering that, because I think a lot of fans will be wondering what he said on that particular point on injuries. And I don't know how you guys wrote your articles, because I felt like I'd heard it all before. I didn't really use it, but people will be interested. And he went down the Thomas Frank route, and I kind of see why. Like he talked about the amount of contact injuries, almost freak injuries, and what can you do about those? And I tend to sort of agree. I mean, Ben Davis with his fractured ankle, or the various other. Lucas Bergvall has his ankle sort of stepped on at a funny angle. I mean, that's just bad luck. I mean, you could see why Thomas Frank.
I presume we've lost Tom there.
It feels like we're cursed.
Midway through.
I do sort of see that, and Spurs, to be fair to them, seem to have made multiple changes to the medical department in the last couple of years. So it's not like they're not trying. They're even planning. I don't know if they've started yet, but building on a bigger medical room as well. So I can see why it frustrates everyone.
Well, they need one to fit all the players in.
Yeah, well, that was the obvious gag when that news story broke. But I can see why it frustrates everyone. But trust me, from that interview with Lange, from Frank, from Ange, it frustrates them more and the players themselves than anyone. But then again, I don't know, Tom, are you buying when it happens consistently that it's just bad luck, or is there more? Is that not good enough an excuse?
I mean, I'm not buying it's bad luck, honestly. And I found that Lange's answer in that briefing, it wasn't very convincing to me. It felt like someone who was sort of saying, well, this is just, how it happens. And we're just having a bad time of things. And I mean, I just look at the answer here, and maybe it's worth reading. He said, what's very important to say is that on the one hand, we have a short squad. And on the other hand, we also had players who could not be registered for European competitions because we have too many players. That's a nonsense. I mean, honestly, like the idea that Spurs have too many players for the Champions League squad, that was just a logistical issue of people signing at different times, and Solanke's injury. if they really think they have too many players and it's just kind of like, they've just been a bit unlucky, like honestly, we're in real trouble. I mean, he said it is without a doubt, especially during the month of January, we had too many injuries. Every time we played, we lost players. It's something we're constantly reviewing with the greatest level of seriousness. But I think if you're unpicking the injuries we had in January, then a few of them are actually contact injuries. I don't know if it's the right word, but solo injuries. And he lists a few of those. And then he also says, across the league, all the teams that are playing European competition are suffering from injuries. That's fine, but this has happened for Spurs for 3 years. Like every single season they've been either first or second. Last year they were up there with Bournemouth. This year I think they're up there with Arsenal and Newcastle. But there aren't over the long period of time. And surely if you're someone like Lange, then you're looking for the biggest sample. And over the past 3 seasons, Tottenham have been consistently in the top 1 or 2 teams in the league for injuries. Like I cannot believe they're still thinking that it's an issue of contact injuries, is what Frank said over and over again. Or like even more unbelievably, that they think they have too many players because of the Champions League squad. Like, I mean, the one thing clearly is that Dan Lewandowski has started. He started last week, the new performance director, who needs to basically be a miracle worker. If that's a really good appointment, then hopefully in 1 or 2 years' time we'll say that was a real game changer, because after that things got better, and he has just started. That's where the club are looking now.
I mean, this injury situation is so depressing. It's gone on for such a long time. And obviously, when you miss Maddison and Kulusevski in particular, it has played a big part. We can all accept that. But you're right, Tom, when it happens for 3 years in a row, you've got to dig a little bit deeper. Of course, we're not helped by the fact that our captain is currently suspended. And I do want to bring the conversation on to Christian Romero and also the system as a result, the system favoured by Tudor. Now, Jamie March got in touch with regards to Romero. He said, "I'm sorry, but that red card against Manchester United was the final straw. He clearly doesn't want to be here. Bench him for the rest of the season, then let him leave." A lot of people disagree with that. David Garrett and Super Sack amongst them. Super Sack says, "At least Romero cares. A lot of his red cards wouldn't be given to other players, and he's having to act rashly because of the poor management that's affected the defence in particular at the club." And then others go on about the system, the fact that we play 3 at the back, and that obviously Lange wants to do that. And J Med 862 says, "Well, 3 at the back will be much better if Romero comes into the team, Danso as well in place of Dragusin and Polinia." And he also says, of course, Porro returning in a right wing-back role would help that particular system. TVGC MMA9215 says Polinia is not going to work in a back 3. He suggests that Byfield's given an opportunity. On the subject of youth, and George, this is obviously an area that you're particularly interested in, Darren Goodwin Evans says, "You've got to start playing Sousa. You bought the guy. He's a proper left back. Play him." Wants to see Williams Barnett given a chance as well, and says young legs with no fear should not be underestimated. Now, my fear about bringing in youngsters at this stage is that you can potentially ruin them in a relegation battle, particularly if things go wrong. But it's an interesting point. You also touched upon the goalkeeping situation a while back when Kinski came in, which denied another youngster an opportunity to develop. What's your current take in terms of whether the youngsters should be thrown in at this stage? And also the system. Do we need Romero to make a back 3 work?
Hopefully you can hear me, because my internet's been dropping in and out. Clearly, the football god's not working with me. Do you know Byfield? I need to check, but I think he wasn't on the bench for the Arsenal game, and I think he might have had a knock. I'm not saying he would have started ahead of Palhinha if he was 100% fit, but that was poorly timed for him. Look, clearly it's not the perfect and ideal situation to put youngsters into it. I think if Mikey Moore was still at the club and not on loan at Rangers, I would be tempted to put him in, because I think he's kind of got the mentality and he's had the experiences of last season to go in and, one, lift the crowd, but also make an impact. It's probably best for his development long term to be at Rangers right now, and he scored again at the weekend, so he's having a good loan spell. The two that might get a look in are, Janai Byfield or Luca Williams-Barnett. I think the way Tudor is speaking in terms of having 10 fit outfield players plus three senior outfield players on the bench, it feels like to me that they won't get a look in at the minute. Maybe the situation changes in a couple of weeks if they get more injuries. But if you look at kind of what he did on Sunday, and he could have played, he could have brought on Sousa, and he didn't even bring on Sousa, and then Tell was playing left wing back. So I kind of fear that we're maybe not going to see the youngsters used. Certainly Luca Williams-Barnett, I kind of made the point on the last pod, I think it was, saying, you've now lost Wilson Odobert, you're missing a 10, you missed a wide player. If Spurs need a goal in the last 10 minutes, I'd be tempted to be putting him on. But I sort of fear that that's probably not going to happen, unfortunately.
Justin Kelly is another who's bemoaning the development of the young players. He mentions the Kinski and Keeley scenario, who says, give the kids a chance. Tomo, with regards to Romero, and I mean, the red card, well, whatever you think of it, he has gone missing at key moments, but he's also been prepared to have a real go at the club as well. So it's been a very difficult period for him. Has he still got a big part to play in digging Spurs out of trouble, particularly because he might make a back three a little more effective?
Definitely. You're looking at players who are coming back now. Tudor said at the press conference after the Arsenal game towards the end, he kind of indicated that Porro and Danso could be available for Fulham. I think Danso helps because it just means you can basically have three actual defenders playing the back three. You can make that Danso, Dragusin and Van der Ven. Then it gives you the kind of knock-on option of pushing Palhinha into central midfield again, which I think probably restores a bit of balance and stability. The Dragusin stats, by the way, that you said earlier, I feel maybe slightly kind of unfair, given I feel like Dragusin's probably the kind of player who's always played when Spurs have been right down to the bare bones, and so he was probably a regular during that kind of Ange run in the second half of last season, for example, when it was just loss, so maybe it's slightly skewed by that. But then, Romero's going to miss Fulham and Palace, which, we didn't know it at the time when he had that 4-game ban, but it looks even worse now that he's, not available for those two really big games. And then he kind of comes back for the Liverpool away game, which, okay, I guess you could sort of say it's good to have him back for that game when they're going to be under a lot of pressure. But in a way, you'd almost rather have him for the first 2 games there. I think Romero, at a time when the squad are sort of on the floor in terms of morale, you need your leaders, and we've had a lot of conversations this season about whether Romero is a good or productive leader or not, and whether he's the kind of long-term solution. The one thing we've repeated, I think, a lot of times is that he really does have the respect of the dressing room, and you can't argue that. The players look up to him, they look to him. Maybe it's not ideal, but he is the kind of Harry Kane figure of this team now. He's the one that everyone sort of looks at in the big games and says, okay, we follow you, and I think in times of pressure, I feel like he has a really big role to play. And I think we can only hope that he's not kind of looking to the summer and the summer transfer window and his future and this kind of thing, and that he actually feels like he sort of owes the team, particularly after this 4-game ban. And for what it's worth, I think he will. I think he will. I think he'll come back all guns blazing and want to kind of put that right.
100%. Romero, his long-term future, what they should do in the summer is a different conversation. But in times of crisis, when they're trying to make something happen, just look at the Europa League last season. He was absolutely essential to that victory. Crucial. They couldn't have done it without him, according to Ange, who also said the other players fear him. He has that kind of respect, but also, imposing nature on the rest of the squad. I think he's going to be essential. The one thing that, just back to the system, first of all, I think, Palhinha getting back in midfield could be crucial. I'm quite excited to see Porro play as a wing-back because we haven't actually seen it much when he's played well at Tottenham. He's signed by Conte. We thought he was a wing-back then. Conte obviously threw his toys out the pram and left within 2 months of Porro arriving. The rest of that season was a disaster. And then Ange comes in and plays him at fullback, which at first seemed sort of crazy. And then he worked well. But I've always thought with his talents, the one thing that he maybe lacks is sort of rapid pace, but his delivery, it could be quite exciting seeing him play in that position, in a 3-4-2-1, or more specifically, and this is the other point I want to make, with 2 strikers up top, which Tudor's got a history of doing that before. It's the one position, provided Solanke and Richarlison are sort of up to speed, that he's actually got quite a few options. You could even play Tal as another striker as well. And then obviously Moani came to the party. Quite like the idea of that. Solanke definitely feels like, along with Romero, the other's absolutely key player to keep fit and available. And I think Tom talked about it the other day, his combinations with Javi, which we've sadly seen hardly at all. But in the I forget which game it was the other day where the two of them linked up really nicely a couple of weeks ago when Solanke came back. That could be the absolute key to Spurs, along with Romero's leadership and the way he drives the team on at the back.
Yeah, I was going to make 2 points actually. If on Romero, first of all, if Spurs need a goal on that final day of the season against Everton, I'd probably bet on Romero more than anyone to get that goal. You know, the way he was playing those last few weeks. You think the West Ham goal, scores against Dortmund, and then with Porro, yeah, I agree completely with Tom. I think actually Porro's form before he got injured was not great, but you probably have to factor in he'd played 15 games in a row before he got injured. You know, he was absolutely running to the ground more than anyone. And I can't remember him ever getting an injury at Tottenham off the top of my head. So that's probably the first break he's really had, actually. Significant break for about 2-3 years. Hopefully this little period off has done him good. And him in the wing-back position should be really, really effective. You know, probably Porro's best quality is his crossing ability. I think towards the end of, before he got that injury, that was one of the things that was off, and it was so noticeable because it's always been so consistent with Porro. If he's defensively been a bit haphazard at times, going forward and sort of crosses wise, he's always been excellent. And you would like to think in that position with a little bit more space, because he is in that half position between the fullback and the opposition winger, he can whip in some brilliant balls. And Solanke scored loads of goals like that at Bournemouth. We haven't seen so much of that at Tottenham, to be honest, because it's been different styles. But if Spurs are going to get out of this, I think Porro is just as importantly as Romero is going to be massive.
Okay, so a lot of you actually have written in asking who the key players are going to be if we're going to get out of trouble this season, and there's three: Solanke, Romero and Porro. In a moment, I'm going to ask all three of you about the X-Man as well. Just a couple of other questions, though, as we head towards a conclusion. Tom A. Lee Saunders says one area Spurs really have to improve is their selling of players. He makes an example of Dele Alli, who, of course, came on and gave a very emotional interview at half-time during the Arsenal game. He says, well, we could have got 80 million for him. Not that we wanted to sell him at the time, but he says Spurs have got a really bad record of not cashing in on players who need to go. And obviously a lot of them are going to have to go during the summer. How important an area is this? And do you think Spurs have woefully underachieved in that department over the past 5 years or so?
Yeah, definitely. And for what it's worth, the club are aware of that. You know, the kind of new regime have sort of pinpointed that as one of their kind of bullet points of things that they really think they want to improve. And I think we saw that in the sale of Brennan Johnson, you know, and whether or not you think that was the right decision or not, I think that was part of that kind of narrative, you know, the idea that we've taken too long in the past quibbling over, 5-10 million here or there, and actually sometimes make the deal and get someone else in, is more important. I mean, more broadly, you're right. I mean, you look at that era, and Dele Alli is a case in point. That amazing team that Tottenham had, apart from Kane, it didn't really make them any money. And even Kane, 100 million seems cheap if you look at how he's playing now. And I always said that I just could never get my head around Tottenham selling Kane for any price, I have to say. But I mean, you look at Eriksen, went to Inter Milan, on the cheap, with his contract running out. Vertonghen and Alderweireld sold late when they were sort of, past their prime. Dele, I think, was a slightly special case. I have to say, I have some sympathy there. I think people who kind of were, maybe now are saying that they, wish that Tottenham had sold him to Real Madrid for 80 million or whatever it was. I think, slightly being Mr. Ange's Captain Hindsight. I don't think anyone could have predicted how Dele's career kind of went, but it is true to say he's another one, right? And I mean, only Kyle Walker is the only one I can think they sort of sold for, what was it, kind of 50 odd million for a good price. And even arguably Walker went on to kind of justify that fee. So I think, like all these things with that team that Spurs had, we talked about how they didn't sign at the crucial times. They also didn't recycle at the right times. They didn't, you look at the best teams and how they keep going. Look at City, look at Man United, of sort of yesteryear. You have to make those really brave decisions sometimes to sell a player maybe just before they're kind of, past their peak. You have to accept they're going to go somewhere else and do a good 1 or 2, 3 years and you get the next one, and Spurs were never really focused on the next one, and we know that. We know that. That's old news. Those transfer windows that went by after the Champions League final were, you still look back now and you think, what was the the real turning point in this kind of, disastrous last couple of years, you still go back to those kind of transfer windows where they just did not get the right players in at the right time, and that was partly a buying problem. But it's Lee Saunders. That was definitely, Lee's right to say that it was a selling problem as well.
I'm just going to jump in because I've actually got to shoot. And my parting gift will be this. I mean, if the question is who is the biggest person responsible for Tottenham's current mess, unfortunately, the answer is Daniel Levy, because you can go all the way back to that 2018-19 season where Spurs didn't sign one player and Pochettino's squad clearly needed to be rejuvenated. They didn't do it. Pochettino's era ended sort of with the squad on fumes, essentially, because the investment had come too late. And then kind of every decision since, Spurs got through the next few years, largely because they had Harry Kane and Son Heung-min. But then even kind of, look at this season, the squad that Spurs have right now, Daniel Levy is responsible for, because he hired Johan Lange. Whether you agree with him sacking Ange or not, that's fine. But he sacked Ange, hired Frank, didn't get Frank Eze, didn't get Frank Morgan Gibbs-White. He's not here. And I remember us getting a question actually saying, if Spurs have success, will it, how much credit will we give to Levy? Well, Spurs have not had success in him leaving, but he does need to take a hell of a lot of the blame for this current mess, because a lot of it is his doing, unfortunately. So I'll bid farewell after that, and hopefully the lawyers don't get me.
Yeah, well, thanks, George. We'll all be looking over our shoulders after that, but safe travels to that. I think also you have to say that Mauricio Pochettino has to share a little bit of the blame for not forcing the issue back in that summer when they didn't sign anybody. Another question quickly, actually, Tom B, this is from Mark, and, it kind of reflects what I've been thinking. He just says, how is it that constantly other teams always seem to have 3 players around our ball carrier? It feels like a monumental effort for us to get into the opposition's final third, and yet they stroll all over us. I mean, certainly Arsenal were doing that at the weekend. It's such hard work for us as a collective at the moment, isn't it?
Well, if I had the answer to that, maybe I'd be a football manager. But one of the things that struck me under Ange, and it was only when an agent sort of pointed this out to me, was how the midfield was the problem. I always was thinking of defenders or other issues, but he was just saying the midfield is way too open. And this is sort of probably the back end of the first season under Ange, when results started to sort of go downhill, and so that was certainly a problem then. And then Frank, similar, but in a sort of different way. The way that the teams that they came up against used to be able to just cut them open at will. I mean, I think back to the Aston Villa game in the FA Cup, that first goal that Buendia scored to take the lead, which was just a nice team move, but Spurs got nowhere near them. And you just never see Tottenham do that to opposing teams. I mean, that's one of the biggest faults of the Thomas Frank era, the inability to break down teams from open play. It's something that, to be honest, it's not. Well, if Igor Tudor can crack that quickly, that will certainly help get some goals and pick up some results. But style isn't really the main issue right now, as he pointed out. It's about just survival. But long term, that is definitely something. Whoever the next manager is, whether it be Tudor somehow or Poch, whoever, they've got to get back to a way of doing exactly what Mark talks about. It's not just about being aesthetically pleasing. It's actually a way of actually winning games is by, you can't just rely on set pieces all the time. Yeah, I totally agree. And I've also realised we've done it again, guys. We've left it until an hour and 7 minutes in to do the plug for YouTube and Spotify. Tom, can you do the honours if people are still listening at this point?
Yeah, guys, please do like and subscribe. We're really pushing for 2,000 subscribers. I think we're trying to get to sort of before the end of the season, and we're sort of locked on 1.7 something. So get us over the line if you can. Tom told me that you need to turn on your notifications as well. So if you're watching on YouTube, please do click the little alarm bell. And what else? Keep it coming with the comments and questions. The Tottenham Way pod @gmail.com. We read them all, and we always try and get through them all in our monthly Q&As. We might have to start doing them slightly more regularly, I think, because we're getting so many in. And check us out on the socials: Instagram, X, TikTok, I think. So yeah.
And I don't like to throw anybody under the bus, but Tom B will confirm this. Tom Allnutt did say just before we went on air that he would take the responsibility of doing what he's just done after 10 minutes, not after an hour and 9 minutes. So
the questions are too good. You sort of want to get on the answers. You forget about the admin.
Blame sufficiently apportioned. You mentioned X. My last question to you both. I was really interested, and actually I applauded Tom Allnutt on Sunday, the reaction pod after the Arsenal game, when you talked about Javi Simmons, who had an awful game. But I did agree with you that at least he doesn't hide from the ball. He tries to get involved. I mean, whether it works or not is very much open to debate. He's had a couple of decent games, but he really struggled at the weekend. Is he good enough, both of you, to actually have sufficient influence in the remaining 11 games to play a big part in getting Tottenham away from trouble? Or have we, unfortunately, ultimately wasted £62 million on him?
Yeah, I mean, he needs to be. He needs to be, doesn't he? I mean, if Spurs are going to have a chance, they really need Javi to kind of step up. And I think the encouraging thing is we have seen it. I think in that first 2 or 3 months, we were all really straining our eyes and putting on, our strongest glasses to try and see what they'd signed, But I think in the last couple of months, we have seen games from Javi which have been so much better. I mean, my memory is terrible, but there were a couple of games where he really stood out, and we were saying, that this is the player Spurs signed. So let's not, completely rewrite history there. But you're right. I think I just found that performance against Arsenal slightly concerning, because I think we saw some of the doubts that we've had about his physicality, about his precision, which is what Tom has talked about a lot, just kind of the accuracy and silly mistakes. I mean, I thought you were going to ask Marcus, is he good enough long term? And I think what's always interesting with these kind of big signings that they're made is that the first manager feels a real sort of responsibility to play them and to make it work. The second manager feels sometimes a bit like that. But by the time you kind of get to a third coach, which Spurs will be on in the summer, they don't feel that responsibility. They come in and they say, this is my job now. I didn't sign this guy, so it's not up to me to kind of make it work. And it'll be interesting to see whoever comes in, what they think of Javi. They might think this is the guy who I want to build my team around. Or they might say, actually, he doesn't work hard enough, or he gives the ball away too much, and I'm done with it. We sell him and we move on. And that'll be interesting to see what the new manager does. I don't think they're not going to sell him straight away. But what I mean is that as the kind of the coaches go through, there's less of a feeling of obligation to kind of play him all the time to make it work, which I think is what Frank felt very much. Let's hope so. I mean, let's hope he delivers in the next few weeks, because Tottenham really need him. And I think it's worth just underlining what we already said about Solanke. I think he does bring the best out of Javi in a completely different way. His hold-up play allows Javi to kind of get around players. And I always remember going back into that first couple of months where I spoke to someone about him, and they said what he needs players around him to bounce the ball off. You can't allow Javi to kind of be exposed on his own and expect him to beat players and sort of, create massive amounts of space. He needs bodies around him, like almost like little walls. He wants to play like a five-a-side team, where you can bounce the ball off the wall at Power League. It's a bit like that. He needs players to get sort of reactions off. And I think having Solanke there really helps him in that regard.
That's the worry, isn't it? The amount of times we've seen in the Premier League him be in those isolated spots. And you think back to maybe his best performance in the Premier League was the win over Brentford. And what did he do? He scored a goal by running from the halfway line. We can't rely on that every week. And I suppose what is concerning is his best performances do seem to have come in Europe, where maybe there's just less intensity. I do think he has definitely improved in that regard, even if against Arsenal, I was back to complaining about his carelessness. And yes, Arsenal did sort of overpower him and the team overall, but generally in the recent matches, he's far more involved and looks a bit more sort of powerful on the ball in the Premier League than he certainly was in those first few months. So that adaptation process has sort of happened, and yet we're still only really seeing the impactful matches from Javi's perspective in Europe. And so obviously he could be absolutely key. I completely agree with Tom. The Solanke, which I talked about earlier, that combination, I think it was actually the Frankfurt and the Dortmund game, maybe it was those two games where they seem to have a really nice link up. If they can transfer that into the Premier League, that will be huge. I mean, the one thing I heard this week so the players had Monday off, but I was told Javi did go in to do some training. Apparently does that quite a lot. So I know we had those question marks before he signed about his work rate. it sounds like he's one of those players who is pretty committed, at least to go, to doing the extra work. It's now about making that pay off, isn't it, in these actual games? And with the fixture list coming up, I do think there is a big caveat for Tudor. His first game was Arsenal. They are worlds away. Yes, it was at home. Yes, it couldn't have really gone much worse, to be honest. So it's hard to be sort of positive after that. But just move on from that. Fulham's a massive challenge this weekend, definitely. They've been really good form, but they're not Arsenal. Maybe this is where we might start to see the real Igor Tudor team having had a week of training, and hopefully the real Javi Simons in the Premier League.
Absolutely. Well, we did say at the start of the show we were going to try and keep the mood positive, and we've all said we're not going to get relegated based on the fixtures. The caveat again being that match against Crystal Palace next week is huge. 2 big London derbies, and Xavi is likeable. He gets the crowd, tries to get the crowd going. So I would love to see him shine. And with Solanke back, who knows? And maybe we'll even see Maddison and Kulusevski before the end of the season. Guys, thank you very much indeed. Thanks to all of you for your questions, your comments. As Tom A was saying, keep them coming. We'll have another one of these Q&As sooner rather than later, and hopefully by the time we next reconvene, Spurs will be 3 points better off and looking more likely to avoid the Armageddon situation that George Sessions referred to. I'm Marcus Buckland. I've been in the company of Tom Barclay of The Sun, Tom Allnutt of The Times, and George Sessions from the Press Association. As always, come on you Spurs.